This is something that left scars I can still feel, even after all these years. It was never openly spoken about in my family, and even now, when I bring it up with my mom, she says very little. But I need to share this story. When I was 13, I got my very first computer, a bulky Dell desktop meant for school. Back in 2003, the internet felt like an entirely new world. AOL, MySpace, Yahoo Messenger, chat rooms with people typing 16F Cali or 18M NY, that was the landscape. For me, a shy and overweight kid, the internet became an escape. In real life, I was invisible. Online, I could be anyone. I could say anything. I could create a version of myself that felt stronger, bolder, more confident. That's how I met him, a man who changed my life forever. It was late one night. The sound of AOL dial-up still makes my stomach tighten when I think about it. I sat alone in the cold, dimly lit kitchen. The computer had been placed there so my mom could keep an eye on me. But the truth was, she worked constantly and didn't know how to use it. I was unmonitored, completely free to wander. That night, bored and lonely, I slipped into a chat room. When I typed 15F here, I wasn't 15. I was 13. But writing 15 felt safer, older, like I belonged. Then a message appeared. "Hey, my name is Rob. Where are you from?" That's how it started. I told him I was from West Virginia, that I was in high school. He said he was 19 and from New York. He wasn't. But to me, it didn't matter. Someone older, someone who seemed interested in me, someone who listened, that alone felt intoxicating. We exchanged emails, phone calls. Some of the details are foggy now, blocked out. But what I do remember is how much it seemed like he cared. Eventually, he came for me. He drove from New York to West Virginia. My mom happened to be working just beside our house that day. He parked far away, then walked through a back alley. When he showed up, my friend who was with me ran off, frightened. I should have taken that as a warning, but I stayed. He hugged me hard, then led me inside. Within minutes, boundaries were crossed that should never have been touched. It was the beginning of something traumatic. The next day, he ordered me to get into his car after school, and I did. Instead of a date or even a drive, he took me to secluded places where he could use me. At one point, I noticed a photo tucked into his visor, a girl, maybe 15 or 16. I asked her about her. He said she was his cousin. I believed him. I even believed him when he told me he loved me. Not long after, I found myself in the back seat of his car with him and his so-called cousin driving. On that long trip, he assaulted me multiple times. I had nothing to eat, nothing to drink, nothing to protect me. At a truck stop, I tried calling my mom, but the phone was dead. I remember drinking from a sink at a rest stop just to keep going. When we finally reached his neighborhood in New York, everything changed. Suddenly, men and women in black suits surrounded the car. They shouted for us to get out. My first thought was that I was being robbed. My very first minutes in New York, and I was convinced something even worse was happening. They pulled me from the car, forced his cousin to the ground, and asked me how old I was. They took me into an unmarked vehicle, and then to an NYPD station. I saw Rob in handcuffs. That was the last time I ever saw him. For me, at 14, it felt like my entire world was collapsing. I was questioned for hours, then taken to a hospital. Later, I stayed at a hotel with a kind woman who fed me and kept me safe until FBI agents came the next day to bring me home. My mom's vigilance saved me. She had written down his license plate, called friends, reached out for help, even contacting the governor. Without her, I may not be here to tell this story. The aftermath was brutal. I sank into depression. I was bullied at school. I hurt myself because I didn't know how else to cope. Rob was sentenced to 10 years in prison, yet I carried the crushing weight of guilt, as though it had all somehow been my fault. Years later, when I was about 24 or 25, I made the mistake of contacting him online. His response was chilling. He threatened to kill both me and my mom if I ever reached out again. My mom believes his real plan had been to sell me into trafficking. He had been grooming other girls too. That realization still makes my blood run cold. But out of all that pain, something good did come. My case forced schools to start teaching internet safety. Parents became more aware of the risks, and because of the intervention, no other girls were taken by him. Now, at 35, I stand strong. I survived. I am healthy, I am whole, and I am proud of every step it took to reclaim my life. I owe so much to my mom, who never gave up on me, who sat by my side in hospitals, who fought relentlessly to bring me back. And I am grateful to everyone who has ever shared their own stories. It reminded me that I wasn't alone. But the truth that haunts me, even now, is the shadow of what if. What if I hadn't been rescued? What if he had succeeded in ways I can't even bear to imagine? That what if follows me, even though he is now a registered sex offender. It reminds me that predators are still out there, waiting online, looking for children to manipulate. And so I say this now: trust your instincts, protect your children, and never underestimate the power of vigilance. It can mean the difference between survival and tragedy. From the very first moment, we knew something about our lives would change forever. There was a darkness looming we couldn't see yet. My wife and I had spent years trying to have children of our own, but eventually we learned that it wasn't going to happen for us biologically. After some time to process that crushing reality, we turned to adoption, something we had discussed many times before. We genuinely believed that every child deserves a loving home, and we were ready to provide one. That's when we met the boy who would become our son, Nate. His early life was rough, to say the least. His biological mother had struggled deeply with addiction and made choices that left her children in unsafe and unstable conditions. Nate's biological father wasn't in a position to raise him, but had the clarity to push for adoption. When Nate was around 6 years old, the state stepped in due to neglect and abuse. His mother didn't contest his removal. We met Nate for the first time last year. I'll admit that I had my reservations. He was hyperactive, distracted, couldn't sit still at the restaurant where we first met, and avoided eye contact. ADHD crossed my mind, but still, he was 9, and kids get anxious and act out, especially in unfamiliar situations. My wife felt a connection with him almost immediately. I was still uncertain, but we kept seeing him, learning more, and giving the idea a chance to grow. We took him to Chuck E. Cheese once, and he bounced off the walls the entire time. Once again, I chalked it up to being a kid. We started getting more details from his foster parents, who we didn't particularly like, They seemed disengaged and more interested in the paycheck than the well-being of the kids. But we pressed on. There were early signs he might be dealing with ADHD, or perhaps something on the autism spectrum. My wife had experience with special needs kids and felt more confident than I did. Slowly, Nate began growing on us, even started calling us Mom and Dad. Those little moments meant a lot. Later, closer to the date that we were scheduled to bring him home for a 6-month trial before the adoption was finalized, we started noticing troubling patterns. He had an intense fixation on video games, and when we tried to place limits on screen time, he'd respond with aggression, throwing things, kicking furniture, screaming. We tried to handle it calmly and firmly, setting clear boundaries and explaining why. Eventually, we had to remove video games altogether. He was evaluated by several professionals, a therapist, psychologist, pediatrician, among others. One said ADHD, another said autism, another reactive attachment disorder. None of the diagnoses were encouraging. But by that point, we were already totally emotionally invested. We thought, we'll make it through. We love him, and love is enough. Or at least, we hoped it would be. That was about a year ago. Since then, things have only gotten harder. Almost daily, we've had to physically restrain him under guidance and approval from therapists and DHS. We've tried reward systems, structure, kindness, patience, consequences, and tried to follow every piece of advice that was ever given to us. We've tried unconditional love, even when we felt like we were running on empty. But Nate lies constantly, even when there's no reason to. He acts out deliberately, breaks things, hurts the dog. He admitted to doing it just to see if it felt pain. He shows no remorse unless he's told to apologize, and even then, it's absolutely hollow. It's like he understands the rules, but simply doesn't care. Tonight was another breaking point. My wife and I finally had a rare night out and dropped Nate off at a supervised parents' night out at the local YMCA. We had a lovely evening for the first time in what felt like months. But when we returned, the staff pulled me aside. Nate had been caught not once, but twice, groping young girls. I was stunned and ashamed. I took him to the car and had him explain to my wife what had happened. We spent hours trying to talk to him, explain why what he did was wrong, trying to get through to him. But again, no remorse, just excuses. After everything, after all the effort, the tears, the broken pieces of ourselves that we'd poured into this, I regret adopting him. I don't know if I could go through this again if I had the chance to choose differently, a different child, or even none at all. I think we would have been happier. I think our lives would have been lighter. As painful as it is to admit, I wish we had never brought Nate into our lives. And though she hasn't said it outright, I think my wife feels the same way. I understand that much of Nate's behavior likely stems from the trauma he endured, cycles of abuse that began long before we ever met him. Obviously, I don't blame him for what was done to him. But this life, this reality, it's not what I thought I was signing up for. I don't know how to help him, and now, late at night, I fear a darker truth. That some parts of him may be beyond repair. That love, patience, structure, even our very souls might not be enough. And the thought that we might never truly escape the storm he brings chills me more than any shadow ever could. Back in the mid-1980s, my mum worked as a house cleaner in Australia. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills, and she was damn good at it. She mostly took jobs in suburban homes near where we lived, but every now and again she'd venture into the rural outskirts through empty stretches of vineyards and old farmland. Those trips always had an eerie quietness, a sense of being watched even when no one was around. Most of her work came from leaving cards at local shops or word of mouth. Random calls would sometimes come through the house phone, strangers asking for her services. She always insisted on meeting clients in person before starting a job. A quick introduction to put a face to a name, to learn the lay of the house, and to make sure the job felt right. That was her rule. One day, however, she received a call from an older woman, maybe in her 60s, requesting her old farmhouse cleaned. The woman was polite, yet insistent, almost unnervingly so. She made a string of very specific demands. No windows opened under any circumstance. No harsh cleaning products in the upstairs bathroom, only water and a detergent she would provide, along with a particular cloth folded neatly on the counter. She refused to meet in person and said she would leave the keys under the front doormat. Mom asked questions, tried to get more information, but the woman spoke over her and rushed the conversation. Still, she offered almost double my mom's usual rate. It was unusual, but the extra income tempted her. With some hesitation, Mom agreed. The following Monday, she packed her gear and drove almost an hour into the countryside. The driveway was long, feeling like a full kilometer from the road to the house. There were no neighbors in sight, just paddocks, fences, and an unnatural stillness. She found the keys under the doormat, as instructed. The house looked lived in, but neglected, dusty, slightly run down, overgrown, but not abandoned. The job started like any other: vacuuming, wiping baseboards, dusting mantels. About an hour in, while scrubbing the kitchen counters, she heard the back door slam. It wasn't subtle, it echoed like a gunshot through the empty house. Her stomach dropped. She had been told explicitly no one else would be there. Mom froze, listening. The old wooden floors creaked beneath her feet, but she heard nothing else. The silence was heavy, almost oppressive. Mom wasn't easily scared, but this felt different. She considered leaving, but remembered she had only been paid a deposit, with 2 bedrooms still unfinished. She decided to push on. The first bedroom was uneventful. The second, at the end of the hall, stopped her in her tracks. The bed was covered in black and white photos, dozens, maybe hundreds, spread end to end. No albums, no frames, just loose prints. At first she couldn't make sense of them: houses, fences, backyards. But, stepping closer, she recognized her own home. Her driveway, her backyard, even her side gate. Some photos were taken through windows, others from far enough away to require a long lens. One showed her at the kitchen sink, seen through the back door glass. Another caught her bending down to pick something off the porch. Every single one taken without her knowledge. Everyone invasive, tracking her life. Her heart pounding, she ran to the kitchen phone, this was before mobiles, and called the police. She grabbed her things and fled the house, leaving the deposit and the unfinished rooms behind. She waited at the end of the driveway until the officers arrived. The police were as disturbed as she was. They took statements, collected the photos, and began an investigation. They questioned the woman who hired Mom, but she insisted the house had been broken into, that she hadn't taken any photos and hadn't even been there in months. None of it added up. The specificity of the requests, the refusal to meet, the peculiar behavior, it all pointed to someone deeply involved. Weeks passed, then months. The investigation stalled. No charges were filed. The woman was never linked to the photos. No other suspects ever emerged. The house was eventually sold, and we moved soon after. Mom never cleaned a rural home again. She refused jobs without meeting clients in person. For a while, she stopped working altogether. Even now, decades later, we still don't know who took those photos or why. Sometimes I think about it. What if she had stayed longer? What if she had gone into that bedroom earlier? What if the slamming door wasn't the wind, but someone entering the house? The worst part, the part that never leaves you, is the why. Why did someone do this? Why follow her from house to house, track her every move, then lure her into that lonely farmhouse? The not knowing is worse than anything. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder, were we ever truly safe? Or was that silent, empty countryside always watching, waiting, just out of sight? I was around 9 or 10 when my mom finally ended things with her wealthy but terrifyingly abusive boyfriend. After the breakup, we moved back to my hometown of Sacramento, California, leaving behind Kingman, Arizona. Adjusting to our new life was not easy. Before, we had lived in large, beautiful houses in safe neighborhoods where crime was practically unheard of. Now, my mom, a single mother raising 2 kids, had moved us into a cramped townhouse in a much rougher area. Everything felt smaller, darker, and far less secure. Not long after settling in, I met a girl at school who quickly became my closest friend. She lived in a 4-plex right across the street, and from the very beginning, we were inseparable, just like our moms. Her mother was a lesbian, and her girlfriend happened to be a good friend of my mom's. It became common for them to spend evenings together at our place, sitting in the living room, drinking and laughing late into the night, while upstairs my friend and I whispered, shared secrets about boys, and giggled about school drama. One night seemed like any other. We decided she would sleep over at my house. Laughing, we ran across the street so she could grab her blanket and overnight bag. But as we reached her driveway, she suddenly froze. I'll never forget the way all the color drained from her face. Her house was completely empty, yet every light inside was blazing. The front door stood wide open, and as we stared in shock, a shadow slid across one of the walls. Terror hit us instantly. Screaming, we bolted back to my place, crying about a man being inside her home. My uncle, who happened to be staying with us at the time, rushed over to check. But when he arrived, the door was firmly shut, the lights were off, and the house looked perfectly normal. The adults laughed, saying we were just imagining things. Too many scary movies, too little sleep, they said. But we knew better. We knew what we had seen, and that image stayed with us. Weeks passed, and odd things began happening. Doors we knew we had closed were suddenly standing wide open. Items in our rooms were moved around, never where we had left them. Clothes, even underwear, started disappearing. Our mothers never spoke of it to us, but we later learned their more private belongings had also gone missing. Yet still, the adults dismissed it all, insisting there was no real cause for concern. Until one night, everything changed. I was staying at my friend's house, and my older sister was babysitting us. We played Donkey Kong Country for a while, but eventually grew bored. My friend remembered a box of old games in the garage, supposedly including Mario Kart. Since the garage light had been broken for ages and their landlord never fixed anything, we grabbed flashlights and headed out to search. The garage was cluttered, filled with piles of junk. As we carefully stepped around, my friend suddenly tripped over something. She stood up, brushing herself off, and we both pointed our flashlights toward the object. What we saw froze us in place. It was a pile of blankets, but not the kind that belonged to her family. Someone had built a hidden little nest in the corner of the garage. Even worse, there was a hole cut into the wall that led directly outside. It was clear someone had been living there. We screamed and bolted back inside. My sister grabbed the phone and called 911, while our moms rushed over in a panic. The horrifying truth soon came out. Someone had been secretly living in that garage for weeks, maybe even months. The intruder had been sneaking into the house whenever it was empty, stealing food, underwear, sex toys, and even going through the bathroom and other private belongings. The most terrifying part? He was never caught. He vanished without a trace, leaving us with nothing but questions and fear. To this day, I can't stop thinking about the countless nights I slept over in that house, completely unaware that someone was hiding just a few feet away. What if he had been violent? What if he had been waiting for the perfect moment to do something worse? That thought chills me even now. The truth is, someone had been silently watching our lives, lurking in the shadows, invading the spaces we thought were safe. And we'll never know how close we came to a fate far darker than we ever imagined.